It's Friday. Good to have you with us on Ed Schultz News and Commentary. Redskins and Packers this Sunday night. I'm going to be right there. So I thought, since my wife and I have moved to Washington, D.C., this will be kind of our present to ourselves, being at the town to go to the NFL game. I took the dive. We're sitting in the front row right behind the Packers. I don't do this very often, but I did it this time, so I'm going to have great seats. The president last night in his town hall meeting finally put a mainstream media thinking and operative Anderson Cooper in his place. First of all, I have nothing against Anderson Cooper, all right? But this was a perfect moment and a perfect response, because the mainstream media in this country constantly regurgitates every bullet point, every angle they possibly can, so they can keep their firearm in this country, and they hide behind the Second Amendment and they make up stuff. And it is a conspiracy. So I've been waiting for this word to get into the conversation in the mainstream media. But the reaction of Anderson Cooper, isn't it a conspiracy, though? You really think it's a conspiracy? Here's the reaction of the president and the exchange.
Is it fair to call it a conspiracy? I mean, well, yeah, a lot of people really believe this deeply, that they just don't. No. They just don't.
Hold it right there. A lot of people believe this garbage deeply, Anderson, because you tell them that. You let them say it unchallenged. Let me pivot to this. I talked to you yesterday about being a gun owner for years. Guess what? I've been a pilot for years. I got my pilot's license in 1988. I got over 3,500 hours. And you know what I have to do every year? I have to go to the doctor. I have to go to the doctor, and he has to make sure that I'm not crazy. He has to make sure that I'm mentally fit and physically fit to be able to fly an airplane. Why? Because you, the public out there, thinks that everybody that flies an airplane ought to be checked out and be competent. But wait a minute, firearms are different. Why is it that everything in the air is so regulated and everything on the ground isn't? And I understand it, and I have no problem with it, and I know that the government is not trying to keep my feet on the ground. The government is just trying to make sure that there's some checks and balances in aviation, and that somebody who's gone off the rails isn't going to be flying over people and possibly have an accident. That someone who's got a bad heart isn't going to be flying. It's called regulation. It's not called confiscation. And you know what? Air travel in this country is the safest way to travel. You cannot argue with the statistics. And the fact is if we have background checks, there will be fewer people who are a little bit on the edge not owning firearms. And you know what I'm talking about. We have to use politically correct language in dealing with the fact that someone's not mentally competent or should not own or operate a firearm. Why is this so hard? And why is it that little old Anderson Cooper, who's never flown an airplane or fired a gun or owned a gun, buys into this constant rhetoric and media hype from the right-wingers and the gun owners of America who think that Obama's coming to get my guns? Jeez, I better think Obama's coming to get my Grand Caravan. Holy smokes, I had no idea he wanted my airplane. Here's the full exchange, but this was a classic example of how the mainstream media just buys into the crap that's thrown out there by these folks who think their guns are going to be taken away.
Is it fair to call it a conspiracy? I mean, well, yeah, a lot of people really believe this deeply, that they just don't. They just don't trust you.
I'm sorry, Cooper. Yes, it is fair to call it a conspiracy. What are you saying? Are you suggesting that the notion that we are creating a plot to take everybody's guns away so that we can impose martial law
but there's certainly
is a conspiracy? Yes, that is a conspiracy. I would hope that you would agree with that. Is that controversial?
He never answered the question. He just smiled because Anderson Cooper doesn't know. At the town hall event, the president did something that has never been done before. He reached out to the NRA. Listen to this.
I'm happy to meet with him. I'm happy to talk to him. But the conversation has to be based on facts and truth and what we're actually proposing.
And not conspiracy.
Imaginary fiction in which Obama's trying to take away your guns. Well, the reason, by the way, that the gun sales spike, not just before I propose something, every time there's a mass shooting, gun sales spike. And part of the reason is that the NRA is convinced, many of its members, that somebody's going to come grab your guns, which is, by the way, really profitable for the gun manufacturers. It's a great advertising mechanism, but it's not necessary. There's enough of a market out there for people who want protection, who are sportsmen, who want to go hunting with their kids, and we can make it safer.
That might be the best answer I've ever heard a president give on firearms in this country. The president made the common sense pitch to the American people where most Americans are. Now, leave it to Fox News to come back and try to prop Obama up as a gun grabber. They put on Chris Cox, who's the NRA executive director. Now, you heard the first part of that soundbite where the president says he'd like to meet him. This is the NRA's response.
Did we participate in CNN's event tonight? No, we didn't. We were offered one pre-screened question. Megan, I know that you don't send your questions over to the White House, so I'd rather have a conversation with you that's intellectually honest than sit through a lecture and get one opportunity to ask a pre-screened question.
Hold it right there. There's no one of greater authority in this country than the President of the United States. It's not like CNN was pulling some bum off the street and saying, hey, you want to talk about guns? This was a remarkable production and the right thing to do by CNN and the President of the United States. I'm sure the other networks would have loved to have been involved in it. The fact is, the president made his case as to why he thinks we need to do these things. And it's not going to inhibit anybody's ability to own a firearm. And I can go buy another airplane today if I want to, because I meet all the healthy standards. The president wants to put $500 million into mental health. That's fantastic. Where's the NRA on that? Oh, that's just part of the gun grabbing measure. Look, there's no stronger lobby in this town, Washington, D.C., than the gun lobby. And there's no easier way to hoodwink a voter than to make them think that the person that they might be voting for is going to grab their firearm. And the president did something monumental last night in addressing all the bullshit that goes with this, the sales job that goes with this. This Chris Cox is nothing but a salesman. And he's in denial of the facts of what's happening in this country and the social changes that have taken place. Here is another interesting deal that popped up last night. The president didn't get heckled. I mean, if these people are so passionate, why weren't they more aggressive on the president? Because they knew the president was right. The president was making the case. The president knew exactly where he is. He has the experience of going to Sandy Hook, which clearly was a event in his life that he will never forget, and it left a mark on him. He called it the worst day of his presidency. Listen to this.
Yeah, I was too, actually. I visited Newtown 2 days after what happened, so it was still very raw. It's the only time I've ever seen Secret Service cry on duty. It continues to haunt me. It was one of the worst days of my presidency.
Joining us now from California, Congresswoman Jackie Speier. Congresswoman, good to have you with us.
Great to be with you, Ed.
Your thoughts on the town hall last night, as you step away from it, what the president did, what his mission was, how it was produced, and the exchanges. What do you think?
Well, there's no question that he is absolutely committed to this issue, is passionate about it, and isn't going to shrink from those who want to criticize him. And I applaud him, and I think the American people are applauding him as well.
Do you think it'll move anybody in Congress, or is the gun lobby so strong it's not going to move anybody?
It's not going to move anyone in Congress.
See, that's really the story, and that's why the president is where he is.
Right. No, this is the most dysfunctional Congress in the history of this country. It's reflected in the polls. That's why there is so much anger out there. And frankly, the members here just don't get it. We've got to come together and work together. And the fact that you can't pass a bill that is just going to keep the status quo in place, it's just going to accommodate the fact that new technologies, the internet, and different ways of selling guns have come into being. But we still want background checks to make sure that ex-cons and persons that are convicted of misdemeanor domestic violence don't get guns. So why would we want to create an avenue for them to escape what we already have as the law in the country?
Closing the gun show loophole, how much of an effect do you think that's going to have?
You know, there's more guns, I think, that are sold on the Internet than are sold at gun shows. In California, we have every imaginable law in the book, and yet there were AK-47s that terrorists in San Bernardino were able to get.
Mm-hmm.
So if we don't appreciate the fact that this has to be a national policy, and that even in California, where you have the strictest gun laws in the country, or among the strictest, it had a year in which there were more guns purchased than ever before. So it's not like anyone isn't able to access guns. We want people who are legally eligible to access guns to be able to access guns. This is making sure those that shouldn't get guns don't get guns.
Astronaut Kelly made a profound point about the number of firearms in the number of households in this country last night. 350 million guns, 65 million households. That's a number that we don't hear too much about. And then he asked the question about how would the government go about confiscating that? Is it even possible? And I think we all know the answer to that. The president made the point that it's the gun manufacturers are behind all of this, and it's big business for firearms, and this is where a lot of the lobbying money comes from. And I'd like to know what, from your position in Congress, how do they operate? How does the gun lobby operate? What do they do? What do they say? How do they function in the halls of Congress?
Well, first of all, Ed, I should admit to you that I have an F rating with the NRA. So
I know that.
They don't come according.
You wear that as a badge of honor, as many people do.
But I think people in Congress are somewhat reflective of the population. They operate in fear. Most of these members operate in fear that there's going to be someone more conservative than them that will run against them, or that the NRA will come up against them with another candidate. So I don't know to what extent the NRA feels that they've got to come around with an arm and twist anyone. I think that they just recognize the power that the gun lobby has in terms of disseminating its lies. Truly, there is no way that you're going to confiscate these guns.
And
There's
finally,
no way anyone wants to confiscate these guns.
No, that's not the mission. And finally, was the president effective? Do you think he moved some Americans last night?
I think the more he speaks about it, the more it becomes a drumbeat, the more likely we'll get some action. You know,
Jackie
the Tea
Speier.
Party gained the kind of clout it did by just continuing to pound on the issue, keep the drumbeat. And I think the president has to do that. I have to do it. I've done many gun buybacks in my district. I've done conferences on After Newtown, and we've done a whole program in my area on making sure kids in schools that have issues are identified and they get the support they need so that we don't have Newtown incidents in our community. So there's lots of things we can do and we must do.
Listen to Donald Trump. This, of course, anything the president does ends up on the campaign trail, and they all react to what they would do. Here's Trump.
You know what a gun-free zone is to a sicko? That's bait. That's like gun-free zone. I will get rid of gun-free zones on schools, and you have to. And on military bases, my first day, it gets signed, okay?
What do you think of that? End gun-free zones at schools. That would be, there would be firearms at elementary schools in America.
So this is how chilling that comment is to me. Imagine having, toddlers and first graders walking around with guns. I mean, how outrageous can we get on this issue to lose any sense of sanity and common sense? I mean, it's absolutely absurd, and it will. I think if people sit back and think about it, they recognize that doesn't make sense. And when you realize that 40% of the guns in this country are purchased without background checks, that should make all of us nervous.
Congresswoman Jackie Speier, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Congresswoman Jackie Speier from California. She's got an F rating with the NRA. That's what it sounds like. I like it. Communication Workers of America, Alliance for American Manufacturing, BioGreen Clean, and the iSave team bring you this production. When we come back, an update from Lori Wallach on the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We spent a lot of time on that, but things are starting to move on Washington. We may be entering the 11th hour. We'll get an update. Stay with us. We're right back on Ed Schultz, Susan Commentary. Hey, folks, you've heard me talk about BioGreen Clean. I'm going to show you right now on my airplane just how tough this is. I want you to keep in mind, chemical-free, 100% plant-derived, biodegradable. It is the safest cleaner that you can get, and it's the most effective. Go to our website, wegoted.com, or go to biogreenclean.com. www.biogreenclean and order today. It's time to continue our conversation about mechanical insulation. Mechanical insulation is for the piping systems in our nation's commercial and industrial facilities. Facility owners are burning up billions of dollars through the lack of mechanical insulation on these piping systems. Call the iSave team. Insulation saves America valuable energy, and this team of energy conservation specialists is shovel-ready to save you money. Visit iSaveTeam.org to have a specialist give your plant an energy audit.
We perpetuate a culture of crime all the way from Wall Street right down to the main street in our hometowns. It's worse than it has been since FDR took control of the problem and said we can't count on industry taking care of the American labor. They probably have already engaged into some type of criminal cover-up, and the law prohibits the government from even doing anything about it.
Catch America's lawyer Mike Papantonio on YouTube at youtube.com/GoLeftTV.
From the steel mills of Pennsylvania, to the auto factories of Michigan, to the modern makers movement, manufacturing makes our nation great. I'm Scott Paul, President of the Alliance for American Manufacturing. We bring business and labor together to advocate for policies that everyone can agree on. Together, we can strengthen manufacturing and create good-paying American jobs. Help us keep it made in America.
Ed Schultz, Susan Commentary, brought to you by Communication Workers of America, Alliance for American Manufacturing, BioGreen Clean, and the iSave team. Just when you thought Keystone was behind us, just when you thought that the rejection by the president of this project that's gone on for 6 years was behind us, here comes the corporation with a massive lawsuit. TransCanada, like any other major corporation, any other multinational, isn't going to give up in the American court system. They have filed a lawsuit in federal court in Houston, Texas, seeking $15 billion in damages because the president has said no to the Keystone XL pipeline. Now, this is going to be a federal lawsuit, as I said, but it's still a permitting process that's taking place in some of the states in the Midwest, such as Nebraska and South Dakota. And the fact is, the issue of eminent domain is not addressed in this lawsuit. So I don't know how all of that is going to come into effect. But the fact of the matter is that this is a classic example of what we're going to face if the Trans-Pacific Partnership goes through. It will be lawsuits like this when multinational corporations feel like that they're not able to do business in the United States the way they want to. For more on that, let's go to Lori Wallach, Director of Public Citizens Global Trade Watch. Lori, good to have you back.
Thank you so much.
What about this lawsuit? Is this a microcosm of what we would be facing?
Well, yes, and it's even one degree worse than what you described, because TransCanada has gone to U.S. federal court to try and reverse the decision to stop the pipeline, saying it's unconstitutional. But then simultaneously, they've gone to a NAFTA tribunal, one of those infamous investor state tribunals. And it's there they're saying they get $15 billion from us taxpayers for being denied a pipeline that, through a democratic process, our government decided wasn't in our interest and was bad for the environment. So it's a double whammy where only foreign corporations get to use this investor-state system. Now, TransCanada and NAFTA and Canadian firms generally have been the only ones attacking us using these extrajudicial corporate tribunals, where, by the way, the judges, the so-called judges, are just private sector corporate attorneys who rotate between suing governments to raid our treasuries and being the so-called judges.
I mean, if the American people can't consume this, if they don't understand how damaging this is, hell, we've lost America. I mean, this is just a complete circumventing of a representative government. What we decide doesn't always happen. That's the bottom line here, because there's a trade agreement with an international tribunal under NAFTA that could circumvent American law. That's what it is.
Basically, it's saying, well, you can pretend you have a democracy. You can have votes. You can have elections. But in the end, if these corporate rights that the so-called trade agreements give foreign investors are in any way infringed, according to 3 anonymous rotating corporate lawyers, then us taxpayers have to reimburse for the privilege of democracy, which, of course, will chill any of these decisions. I mean, hell, look at what happened with that country of origin meat label.
Yeah.
$1 billion of threat and sanctions, and Congress gutted that law that 90% of Americans want. We don't have that in the grocery store anymore, Ed. You go to the grocery store, you have no idea. It's mystery meat time. So imagine $15 billion.
Yeah, we're back to mystery meat. It might have the USDA stamp of approval on it, but that's just like a brown paper bag. It doesn't say anything or do anything. It just carries. And the bottom line is that the mystery meat is right. That you don't know where that consumers, you don't know where that meat's coming from. That's not what we voted on. But that's the Congress stripped it out so they could get along with the TPP. By the way, where are we with that horrendous trade agreement?
Well, here's the only good news. You know, folks, if you, right now, with all of our trade agreements that have those crazy tribunals, there are only about 9,000 corporations, and that's a lot, but it's a lot of ma and pa operations. It's from developing countries, not a lot of investors here. But if we get into that TPP, overnight, 9,500 more corporations, and it's the big doozies. It's the Japanese multinationals. It's the Australian mining firms. It's financial global firms. So how do we stop it? The good news is right now they don't necessarily quite have the votes to pass it in the House of Representatives. They're just on the knife's edge. So everyone hearing this who does not want a TPP future, you got to talk to your members of the House of Representatives. They all have public schedules. Go to the blue pages, call their local district office, find out when they're having an open house or a town hall meeting, and just go up and shake your congressman's or congresswoman's hand. Don't let go. Eyeball them and say, will you commit to me to oppose the TPP? Democrats and Republicans, a whole passel of them have already said they will vote no. You guys can all round up the last couple dozen needed, and we will save ourselves from this.
It's a conventional wisdom. They'll get 50 in the Senate, but they don't have the majority in the House. Is that where it is?
Correct. Exactly.
Okay. All right. And Mitch McConnell's not doing it because of a tobacco provision, but he may be holding out on that just to draw these other guys in support out of it to make sure he gets the 50 votes?
He's wangling. He's negotiating. In the end, I will walk on my hands from Capitol Hill to the White House before that man opposes the TPP for real.
That says it all. Lori Wallach, always great to visit. Thanks for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
This is Ed Schultz, News and Commentary. Have a great one, a great weekend. Look forward to the Packers beating the Skins. I can't say that too loud in this town, but that's where I'm at. Have a great one. We're back Monday.